welcome to Women in Finance. It's episode 7, can you believe it? And it's been a very interesting journey so far, and also learning about some of the stories that a lot of the women that we've had on the platform had to share. So this episode is slightly different, but it also has the same kind of themes coming through in order to, make you think a little bit about considering a career in finance, and also to learn from some of the women who've been through quite a lot. And the guest for today, her name is Cami Mbulawa. She's the head of alternative investment services at RisCura. RisCura is a global investment firm specializing in emerging and frontier markets. So we're going to be talking to Cami about her career journey, but also touching on how do we solve the issue of low representation when it comes to the financial industry, perhaps even looking at doing it through education and training. And we're going to be talking about RisCura's Chartered Accountant training program that allows both men and women students to complete their articles in the private equity sector. Cami, thank you so much for your time.
I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you so much.
So you've had a very interesting career. I stalked you a little bit, and part of it is because I'm a journalist, but it was also quite nice to see your career trajectory. And if I got it right, this is not your first time being at RisCura. This is your second return. But before we get to that, let's talk about where it all started for you. Was finance always a career option, or did you have other options to consider?
So it was really a process of elimination, I suppose. I just always knew. I was about 10, my best friend and I were like corner office, red high heels. That was about as far as my career planning had gone until I got to high school and started accounting, and I realized I loved it. It made sense. And then, then this conversation around chartered accountant options started coming up. And also when I was younger, the Felicia Mabuza show, at that point there were only 10 chartered accountants, and my mom turned to me and she was like, that's what you're doing. So when I got to high school and I loved it, I was like, okay, we have a plan. And the journey started at that point.
It's so interesting because when I think about my relationship with accounting in high school, it was a love-hate relationship. And it's so weird how the universe or how life works. What I hated, I'm actually doing now as part of my job as a financial journalist. So I didn't quite escape it. So tell me about, the transition from high school into university. What was that?
It was very different. I loved the different cultures, and everyone told me I didn't look like an accounting student, so everyone used to guess humanities, and that was fun. It just kind of solidified the love for the subject for me. It was a bit of a struggle. I know people always go, no, I passed first time. Third year, I'd lost my parents at in first year. So, it was a bit shaky, but I made it through. And then I did my honors with UNISA, and I joined KPMG for 3-year articles. And that was an amazing time. As much as audit wasn't specifically for me, but I loved the people. It was mostly young people. I loved being out at clients and seeing what they do. And it was my first kind of foray into the real world, to actually see how things work, what a financial manager does, what a board of directors does. And I'm like a very curious person. So, when you're reading board minutes just to confirm things in terms of audit, I was like, who are these people? What do they do? It seems like something I'd be interested in. And then another journey started just based on that.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful.
Sorry to cut you off there. I was curious to ask you, if people were saying that you didn't look like an accounting student, what kind of student were you in varsity? Were you like the A student, or how would you describe your performance?
I was so convinced I was a cool kid. So definitely not an A student. I did my fair share of partying, but balance, balance. I somehow made it through first and second year, and then third year accounting taught me to focus again and leave the streets and focus on the books. And I had to pivot just to make sure I meet my own goals.
I I think we had a guest a couple of weeks ago who had to admit, I mean, she's, running her own investment company, and she managed to, well, she told us that I think her highest mark, not her highest, but during the times of partying and not maintaining that balance, I think she said she had 38% for tax. And that's
that's so humble you. And then that's also the first time we came across negative marking. So in economics, you get negative numbers, you get -10.
And no one tells you this, you only pick it up afterwards, that if you don't know the question, don't answer it. Like, it sounds like it's terrible not to answer a question, especially when they say answer everything. But if I'm gonna get it wrong, and you're gonna assume I guessed, and you're gonna mark it, no, I'd rather just not answer it. Let me leave it.
Yeah, that was a tough situation. But it's also a nice way to sort of confirm that you have kept something through the years. There is something between the ears.
Yeah. When you look at the early years of your career, did you have any mentors? Did you have people pulling you under their wing to just show you the ropes?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. At varsity, I was working at a call center. There's someone in a year above me, so he used to tell me which ones to concentrate on, stats. So I'd go into the year pretty prepped, and some of my older friends, I'd always reach out and say, please explain this concept. And then when I started articles, you were assigned kind of a mentor. So that person would check in with you, and then it's, at the partner level, you'd also interact with them. That helped a lot, learning how to get honest feedback and defending your position. And I was, a black woman starting in a very, very white world at that point. So I wasn't used to fighting for myself. First couple of times I just sat there and smiled and be like, okay, well, it wasn't bad, it was kind of just like average. And then at some point I was like, no, I feel like I'm slightly above average now, we need to talk. And you kind of start building your own confidence as you get used to the work and your colleagues. But I had such a great support system. We're trainees, our first year, the group of 60 of us. So, those are lifelong bonds and friendships I've made, and we always manage to lift each other up when we're going through tough times.
That's amazing. So you move from, you start working at KPMG. Tell me about the trajectory then. What informed your next career move?
But it was finished, the training program was finished, speaking to a few recruiters. That's when I came across RisCura for the first time. And it was relatively more interesting work than, what I'd seen, sort of financial management and staying in audit. And it was around valuations. And so I went in, first interview, did a case study, and I really, really loved the firm, the culture, the type of work I was doing. It was not widely known at that point, valuing private equity companies. And I stayed there as an analyst, and then I was an associate, and the team just grew. And I just felt like I'd entered a new world. And when I used to go to private equity conferences at that point, there were barely any women, never mind any black women. I think there was one black woman, and we're still friends today.
Yeah.
So and now to come back to that industry 4 years ago, and you see the difference, it's incredible. It's really incredible. We've come a long way, I have to say.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. I mean, I always say, I think with a lot of women who've come on the platform, for them making the decision to leave one, place of employment and look for other opportunities was influenced by a number of factors. For you, being at RisCura, and I mean, I looked around in terms of your career movements. You've done quite a lot of really extensive, great work. What do you then consider when you're looking at job opportunities, or when someone comes knocking on your door and says, Cami, look, we think you've got something we like? What ticks the box for you to say, okay, I'll consider this opportunity?
So early in my career, I actually made a mistake of letting money lead me. I'm kind of driven by two things. I'm very curious. I tend to go with my gut. So RisCura was largely my gut. They were a startup at that point. I hadn't seen a corporate firm be that kind of I don't know, what's the English word for it besides cool? It was edgy for a financial services firm, and I thought, yeah, these seem to be my people. And then at that point, you've got a bit of family to take care of, and I'd had an interest in oil and gas. Even at RisCura, I used to value oil and gas assets, and I thought, that's a really good place. And at that point, oil was making a lot of money. And I was like, okay, so my curiosity drives me. I was like, what's oil and gas? Let's go find out. When BP called, I was doing a bit of treasury management for them. That was an awesome experience. Also how to see, the cycles of cash flows in that industry, managing working capital and things like that. So I learned a lot. It's basically curiosity, and I'm someone, unfortunately, who reaches a plateau probably too fast, and what I call sometimes boredom. Once I've figured it out, I'm kind of ready for the new challenge. So that's kind of been my driver. I spent, I think, about 2 years with BP, and then I moved on to the next step in the career.
Do you recall some of the challenges you went through as you navigated your career when you look back?
Yeah, it was pretty tough. At that point, BE appointments felt like they were coming from top down, and the hiring managers didn't have conviction in it. So, because you passed the interviews, technically you passed their psychometrics, there was no reason, not to hire you, but you definitely felt the resentment, and simply not exposing you to enough. So I'm the type of person who puts their hands up. So luckily, you can't really freeze me out. I will go to another manager and ask for work. That's what I learned in audit. I always know how to keep myself busy, and I naturally network with people. I enjoy conversations with people. So that's helped me in really good stead over the years. But then at some point, you are bored. You're not being made use of to the maximum of your abilities, and it's usually time for me to move on.
That's so interesting, because I think we start to see that, especially in the journalism world, especially in financial journalism, because there's so much to learn and to share with with people out there. I think one of my biggest passions, outside of advocating for females in the financial industry, but also breaking that in and talking about women in financial journalism, because as we have more females writing about what's going on in your world in private equity, community members and members of the public start feeling like they're part of the conversation when it comes to developments in our economy. I mean, right now we're in a high interest rate, high inflation rates environment where a lot of people may not necessarily understand why we're having these interest rate increases, especially from the Reserve Bank. So when you have more females writing about the stuff, talking about it, it's so helpful.
And it's the one thing approachability. You find that you're more approachable. People feel like you might explain. They won't irritate you with the process of understanding.
And what's lovely about you and the many other ladies who come on the platform is that as more females watch this, it's like, oh, she's had an amazing career, or she's gone through some of the things I'm going through. Maybe I shouldn't quit as yet. Maybe I should just hold on and believe that, we are making a difference in the industry. What I wanted to talk to you about is that, fast forward, you're back at RisCura, and I mentioned in my intro, you're the head of alternative investment services. For someone watching this, they're probably thinking, what does the head of alternative investment services actually do? Run me through a typical day.
Okay, so what we typically do is have a team of about 25 at our peak season. We value unlisted companies, so things that are not listed on the JSE. We value infrastructure projects, looking at the cash flows. So we do a good chunk of the work for Africa's largest asset manager for their year end. So we tend to do the valuations that go into the financial, the annual financial statements. which means they have to be highly rigorous. They go through the big four auditors. You go present to the various committees, and that you have to kind of learn to be adaptable, but confident in that space. And sometimes you make mistakes in your assumptions or in a calculation, and I've learned to admit that and fix it. So our team, how we work, we have junior analysts, senior analysts, which tends to be newly qualified chartered accountants. So my team is largely made up of chartered accountants and CFA charter holders. And depending on your valuation knowledge, we start you off light, and then as you gain more experience, you'll start doing the big DCF valuations, and a year or two after that, then you started to join our management team, which means you review, you manage our clients, conferences, business development. Which is how we started our CA training program. When I rejoined, RisCura had made the decision to start, but because I love people and development, and my time at KPMG being a trainer, I was like, let me run with it. This is what I love. And we launched with 4 trainees, 2019. And to date I've signed off 5. And 4 of those are, there's 2 black women in there, 2 black guys, and 1 white guy. And it fills me with so much joy, because it kind of fits our natural process. They can start in their first year, doing some of the light stuff, and it gets more complex as they move through. And then by the time they signed off, they're heads above anyone who was in audit, who's trying to join an investment bank, private equity firm, because they've been doing the groundwork for 3 years. So it's highly competitive. I'm extremely proud of them, and that's my part in the advancement of female and just all graduates. I love the energy of working with young people.
Tell me about the intake. I think one of the misconceptions when I was having a conversation probably a couple of years ago with some of the law firms, there was a misconception that the law firms only take graduates from the big universities, UCT, VITS, etc. And I think those who were in the private tertiary institutions felt as though they weren't good enough to apply. What are you looking for in that intake for your chartered accountant program?
Sure, that is a real bias that people have. People just kind of go to the top 4 and call it a day. So in my first year, I think all my trainees were from UCT. We're around the corner, and it was made. They actually knew who RisCura was. And then as the program expands, they would bring their friends into it, and I made it so we advertised at the universities, and in that second year I just decided we're not capturing enough talent, so we're going to go to the smaller universities, KZN, PE, Northwest, and the quality of the trainees are found just in this universities has been incredible, because there's also, you can see sometimes they're so unsure of themselves, but when they're done in the 3 years, they can compete with anyone who went to a private school and your UCTs of the world. So for the first time, I think this year, I had 2 people who come through from Monash, which is one of the private universities. So from our perspective, really, we want you to have 4 areas that we're comfortable with, and we have a technical interview. You must know what's happening in your macroeconomic environment, interest rates, exchange rates, impacts, things like that. You must have a level of business acumen to understand how industries work, and then a bit of valuation knowledge and a bit of accounting, because that always comes up when we're doing valuation work. I don't kind of care about your accent, how you come across. If you're technically brilliant, you're always welcome with our team. And it's really gratifying to see someone who maybe went to UNISA and didn't have the natural confidence of a UJ student or VIT student, and to just see them blossom and understanding they are just as good.
You mentioned that your team is made up of CAs and CFAs. Do you consider those who come in with an engineering background? Because we tend to find a lot of engineers who end up in finance. Would you be open to that as well?
In the banks, I think initially we did actually have an engineer when I joined. At that point, we were 5 analysts. But the banks love them, and we can barely compete with their salaries. Yeah, but they're in high demand. I actually saw something the other day that said the banks needs to stop hiring engineers so they can go back to fixing the country.
It's so interesting because when I went to university, there were quite a lot of engineers, especially my first year. But it was so interesting to see how by the time we get to 4th year, the numbers have dwindled. Everyone has either gone into humanities or accounting. But it's actually quite interesting to see that number come through. What other programs do you offer within RisCura that are targeted at, say, young women graduates? Is it just the CA program, or is there other initiatives that you're working on?
So if you remember, the president, he launched that youth employment service, YES, it's called YES. So we were one of the first companies to participate, and we found incredible talent there as well. There's people with masters sitting at home. It's ridiculous. And when it started, I was also kind of looking after that. The stipend that the government mentions is not a livable salary. It's literally taxi money to work. So, I made sure that we at least make it a livable salary. And I think we've had about 4 rounds now, and a lot of them get absorbed into the business because we are always looking for new graduates. So that's been really, really impressive. And to see the guys afterwards working for the big asset managers, and that's an opportunity really they wouldn't have had if they weren't brave enough to say, if these companies are not getting back to me, let me join this program and get to work, and then I will figure it out after that.
There's been this drive to have quotas, especially when it comes to listed companies, to sort of manage the kind of women that are coming through at a board level. And I always wonder whether that works, because I find that quotas seem like we're just ticking off a box, as opposed to it being a culture thing within our organization, that we're going to take a serious initiative to develop young women right from the bottom and push them up to board level, because we want them to be with us. Where do you stand on these on quotas, especially for listed companies, just have a certain percentage of females on the board, etc.?
Listen, I think it's important to have it. If it's written down on paper, it means it's a goal, and you have to, at least make attempts to meet it. It's the way that people go about it. I don't think quotas are bad, but it's the intention behind the action and how you execute. So I sit on a few boards. It was, it started as the SPCA, voluntary. I was there for about 6-7 years, just because I have a genuine interest for it. And by the time you kind of get to listed levels, there's a certain, they kind of all know each other. So it's a small, and people tend to recommend you. So the people are not building their own talent from the ground up to process. And I as much as I'm a CA, it probably feels like it's too focused on chartered accountants at the moment, to be honest. And there's a lot of really good professionals in the countries that are could add value to a board. You could have maybe 2-3 CAs, but if something is a technical or manufacturing, you need the engineers on the board. You need the legal. It's a full complement. But I am loving how many black young women I'm seeing on listed boards. And I hope they're fully empowered. They know they're confident enough to say what their viewpoint is, and they've taken through them all the processes of understanding the various components of the companies. But I'm really excited by growth in that industry. I just feel people could be slightly more intentional about it.
The one thing I've picked up about you in our 24 minutes of conversation is that you don't shy away from a challenge. So what informed you in the beginning to say, I'm going to put my hand up for board positions? Because I think some of the females I've had conversations with used to have this imposter syndrome where they think, oh, I gotta have served at a different board for me to be considered at this company or whatever. But for you, what's gave you that confidence to say, well, I'm good enough to actually sit on a board and I can contribute meaningfully?
I was lucky enough at KPMG, like a manager I just worked briefly on. He said the SPCA is looking for a new CA and they would like a young black woman who's, can take up treasury kind of role for them. I met with the board members, but I did my homework at that point because I need, like, my blood ran quick because I was like, ooh, it's finally happening. And, I downloaded the financials, I went through them. When you do that stuff, you have to prep yourself as well as you could. And that's what I bring, financial expertise. As much as I thought that, I don't know much, found out that I do actually. And talk through the board. And that was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. Every Thursday, once a month, no matter which job I was on the freeway to Grassy Park because I was passionate about it and I felt like I made a difference. At that point, my kind of network, they knew. And then, people I went to articles were like, Cami, our company is looking for a new director. Are you keen? And that's literally how the network has grown my side. And then a year or two ago, I decided to professionalize it, and I qualified as a chartered director with the Institute of Directors in South Africa.
Wow.
You have to meet you have to do the work, but the networks are incredible. People underestimate how much networking and being a friendly face, not burning bridges behind you. And I find that a lot of what you're saying about imposter syndrome, it was there. It was definitely there. But I grew up in the fake it till you make it era. And, do as much homework as you can to arm yourself, but be brave, step out. I've never been someone who's, bravery is something I was born with for whatever reason. And I'll always put my hand up. I'll figure it out. I have enough faith that I might not know it, but I'll figure it out, and then I will get help from other smarter people, from people other than me if I've got gaps to fill. But even now when I'm hiring, I find people will see our job spec and go, ooh, a woman. And go, look, no, I can't apply for that. The boys are like, oh, this is my world. This is exactly what I want to do. I want to, run my own fund. This is a good place for it. And I suffered the same thing. We kind of fall into our roles rather than, this is what I want to execute in the next couple of years. But I'm finding maybe the youngerish generation, I'm knocking on 40, so the youngerish generation is more natural at being ambitious and not being shy about it, and that's lovely to see.
On that note then, how have you managed to be clear about your career expectations? Because I found that in the 13 years of my career, I think in the early days I didn't always voice when I felt that I'm ready for the next challenge, or when I found out that I'm being paid a salary that's lower than my counterpart who's doing the exact same thing. I didn't voice it, I didn't speak up, I just kept quiet. And when I was ready for the next level of development, I didn't talk to my line manager about it. How did you manage over the years to be clear and say, this is what I want to achieve, and this is the kind of work I want to put my hand up for?
It's definitely not an easy situation. I'm lucky in the sense that there was one technical, what is it, those annual reviews, and this was an agricultural company, and so I wasn't happy, and when they send you your own self-assessment, and I knew I was lighting a fire, so I just rated myself as excellent for every single thing. Even I know that, Cami, what are you starting? I was like, let's go. And I remember that day, and then the CEO and the CFO I reported to, because I felt like there's been a lot of promises that were made that I wasn't fully capacitated. And I was starting to get really, really frustrated. And I remember I knew I was walking into a light civil war. On that day, I dressed up. I was in all red. I power suited, and I just at some things. I was like, I just wanted us to have bring you to the table so we have a really, really honest conversation about how you supporting me to get there or not. Suffice it to say, I wasn't there for very long, but that taught me that sometimes something's wrong and you don't know how to voice it. Perhaps it would have been more mature to go out for coffee, but he's to ignore me. Like I'd never, going to his office and what about this? You said you would do this, and it's like yeah, and then nothing ever happens. And that was the first time I realized that when I dressed confident, even when I used to go write exams for those ecos papers, I always used to look good on that day. That's half my confidence boost, and then back up with a bit of technical. But it's not an easy conversation, and I don't think we need to be as aggressive as some of the guys. And now being in the running a team, one of the guys will say, "I'm not happy." The girls will just be like, "I'm really, really Luckily, I'm a fair employer, so I make sure that there's no discrepancies between the girls' and boys' salaries. But one or two of the guys came back and said, have you considered this and this and this? And, he was right. And I had to think about it and say, okay, I hadn't considered all those things. I hear you. And here's where I can meet you. Yeah. It takes practice to build that muscle, and it's sort of setting yourself up for, have a list of what you think you need, what you think you're worth, do your research, what are your peers getting worth, where are you in relation to that, and having your little notes around it will make you feel a bit calmer and perhaps out of the office, so it's nothing, it reduces the defense mechanisms.
As a side note, unrelated to our conversation, and because, what we're talking about, we're having a conversation, it's a real conversation. I've just realized that I've been mispronouncing your name, and I feel so badly, and I just heard you say it now. And I'm so terribly sorry, and I had no idea that I'm supposed to pronounce it as Cami, right?
Yes, it is Cami, but I live in Cape Town, so...
That's
why it's interchangeable to me, Cami.
Okay. Well, at least now they say if you know better, you do better. So I know better now that is how you pronounce it. But speaking of knowing better and doing better, if you could advise your younger self, knowing everything that you've learned about yourself over the years, what would you tell her? And also, how old is she? Which younger self are you advising? Age?
She's 25. Felt like a seminal year, starting to transition out of audit and thinking about where to go and not knowing what the options are. And audit was a safe space. You are told exactly what to do and when. So now you kind of have to make your first real career decisions. At that point, even when recruiters were called, they you want to do buy side, sell side, front office, back office. I was like, what is that? And I didn't really have people in my community who knew what that was either. So there was no real big internet at that point to kind of reach out and link and reach out to people. I wish I had been a bit braver with taking more advice and finding people in the industry to assist. But I did it the best way I could. I've always had a big affinity for Joburg, and seeing black professionals in Joburg used to boost my confidence. There were so few of us down in Cape Town who would easy to tell yourself that you're not meant to be there. and that used to boost me. There's something really special about the energy in Joburg. So that went a long way. I think I would have been braver, bolder, and go for some jobs. I used to look at the job spec and it would scare me, and I'm like, oh no. Then I wish I'd pushed through some of that fear. But also I've got a good intuition, so it wouldn't necessarily be in the right place for me. I don't know if I should have gone for more money or work-life balance. At this point, I was like, you should have probably gone for more money right from the jump.
Wow. Before I let you go, if people are interested in the RisCura programs, where do they start? Who do they contact? How does it work?
So on our website, RisCura.com, we have the application process there. We've got a few YouTube videos. If you search, I record with the trainees every couple of years, just so people get a sense of who we are and what type of articles and who they're working with. And I'd really encourage, I would love to bring more Black people to Cape Town. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Wow, that's amazing. Cami, thank you so much for your time. That is Cami Mbulawa, who's the head of Alternative Investment Services at RisCura. Certainly a very lovely conversation, and I really enjoyed chatting with you. So thank you so much for making time.
It's been such an honor. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks. Well, that is it from us. Remember to subscribe and like, and also watch the other episodes as well. And if there's anything you want to know about RisCura's program, as she mentioned, you can go to the YouTube page, and you can also go to their website to get a little bit more information. But that is it for me. Until next time, goodbye.